There were only 5 of us on this camping trip. So why did we keep counting 6? The shadows grew longer as night fell, and that's when we realized someone else was there with us. Welcome to Gast, where your worst nightmares come to life. I'm Bruce Smithers, and tonight we have 3 stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school and were celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them, hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother, as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So Dave had went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly, and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied, when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration, except for, "It's all right, I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right? I mean, there's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head-on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty, one for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep-deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole six-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills, despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. Who started the fire? I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed, like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now," someone else said. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow," Eric agreed. I tried to protest but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one-person tents with us, but we could squeeze two if we tried. That way, no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave and Sally, like always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point, we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly, we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. "There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and..." I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U-shape so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it. His head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The five of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my ribcage, and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face, and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time. But what if the person you can't trust isn't a stranger in the woods? What if there's someone much closer to home? Our next story shows us that sometimes the greatest darkness lurks in our own family. "Someone we didn't know tried to pick Dylan up from school today," said his elementary teacher. "The guy said he was Dylan's older brother." "Dylan doesn't have a brother," I said, alarmed. "We thought so too," replied the teacher. I suspected something wasn't right straight away. It was this tall, lanky guy with black hair, looked in his late 30s, maybe even 40. He knew your address, Dylan's full name and birthday, and which class he was in. I went inside to check with the principal. When I came back out, the guy was gone. I was silent for a second as I stood facing the teacher outside the school gate. The gate separated the main road and a large playground and basketball court leading into the school. All the other kids and parents had left, and we were the only ones standing outside. "Where's Dylan now?" I asked. "He's waiting for you in the principal's office," she said, gesturing for me to follow as she turned around. I walked across the playground behind her shakily, then through the corridors to the office. My 8-year-old son Dylan sat on the couch in the principal's office, still as a stone. The principal sat behind her desk, and there was a cop standing next to her. "Hey, buddy," I said, "you okay?" Dylan looked at me blankly. My Dylan was always a quiet boy. It was just the 2 of us at home at the time. I was a single dad. My late wife Angie, Dylan's mother, died a year prior. She'd been hit by a car while cycling around a sharp bend, and they never identified the driver. I won't go into any more detail here, as frankly I'd rather not relive that period, but safe to say it destroyed me. I tried to pick up the pieces and stay strong for Dylan. Was I doing a good job? Only God knows. I received no feedback. Since then, Dylan became even more withdrawn, pretty much remaining silent until spoken to. He was seen by a child psychologist and various other members of the welfare team at school, but after assessment, they were sure he didn't have autism or the like. He could speak up when he was pressed. He was just shy and preferred to keep to himself. The cop confirmed I was Dylan's dad, then asked me a few questions. He finally told us they'd try and find the guy and to report if we ever saw him again. The principal and teacher said a few things. It was a blur. All I remember is sweating profusely with my knees shaking, trying to comprehend the fact that someone had tried to kidnap my son. "Dylan, you didn't know that man, did you?" asked the principal. Dylan shook his head. I was on edge after that day. Dylan was my whole world, all the family I had left, and I couldn't stand the possibility that he could be in danger. It made me sick. Who was this bastard? Why my son? Did he know us, or was it some random creep? I always walked Dylan to and from school thereafter, and was never late to pick him up again. Meanwhile, Dylan himself didn't seem rattled in the slightest. He never mentioned the incident unless specifically asked. At the time, I thought he was just timid and didn't want to cause trouble. A couple of weeks later, after the incident, the same homeroom teacher called me during her lunch break. She said one of the kids in her class saw Dylan talking to a man through the school fence. When she rushed out, the man was gone. When Dylan was asked about it, he said he hadn't been talking to anyone. The girl who apparently spotted him was questioned further, and she was adamant she saw Dylan talking to a tall, lanky man with messy, black hair. The cops were called again, did a quick search of the perimeter of the school, but they found no one suspicious. That afternoon, I sat Dylan down at the kitchen table. "I won't get angry, I just need you to tell me the truth," I said, trying to steady my nerves. "Did you or didn't you talk to a stranger today at school? Yes or no?" He shrugged. Getting an answer out of him was harder than drawing blood from a stone. "How many times have we told you not to talk to strangers? It's for your own safety. You do understand that, don't you, son?" He nodded, looking slightly afraid. I realized I had raised my voice and felt guilty immediately. Exasperated and running on 2 hours of sleep, I left him at the dining table and went straight to bed. That night, I woke at 2 a.m. and went for a bathroom trip. I decided to check on Dylan while I was at it. He wasn't in his room. I called out his name and looked around in the living room and kitchen, getting more frantic as the seconds ticked by. I checked wardrobes, corners, even in cupboards that made no sense to look in as he'd never fit in them, but I was desperate, thinking he'd been kidnapped. I went out into the street, yelling his name as I ran up and down it like a maniac to no avail. As I came back into the house ready to call the police, I looked in Dylan's room for one last check. He was sitting up on his bed, wide awake and staring back at me. "Where were you?" I asked, relieved but still alarmed. "I was here," he replied. "No, you weren't. I was looking everywhere for you and you weren't in here." I was. Had I imagined all of that? I shook my head, feeling a migraine coming on. "Just stay in your room, okay? Don't scare me." I thought my eyes had deceived me somehow and the paranoia was getting to me. Perhaps I should have paid attention to the fact that the window was wide open. About a year after those incidents, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I was inside doing some paperwork while Dylan was in his room playing Minecraft. I was on alert immediately. No one ever knocked on the door. We lived in a block of apartments, and friends or acquaintances would always wait outside the main door, ring the doorbell, and I would greet them downstairs. This meant it was likely an upstairs or downstairs neighbour who needed something. I had a few of their numbers from when we moved in for contact should the need ever arise, but we weren't close at all. I wondered what could be the problem. I walked up to the door and looked outside the peephole. There was no one there. Odd, I thought. Perhaps I had heard something. Those random occurrences were commonplace now, and second-guessing myself was just in my nature at that point. As I walked back to my desk in the living room, I heard another knock. Something was up. I walked up to the door again. No one seen through the peephole. Was someone pranking us? I stood just behind the door and texted my upstairs neighbour, asking him if he'd knocked on the door. A few moments later, I heard footsteps upstairs that went in the direction of the door, then hurriedly back into the apartment. I then received a text back about a minute later. Do not open the door. There's a guy with a huge knife crouching, hiding right next to your door. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my upstairs neighbour. Calling cops RN. Stay inside. I froze as all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was paralysed for a few seconds. When I came to my senses, I tiptoed to Dylan's room. Stay inside, keep quiet, I whispered, my eyes bulging, beads of sweat dripping down my forehead. I had never felt my heart beat so fast. Dylan looked up and raised his eyebrows as I shut his door slowly and stood outside it, about to throw up and shit myself at the same time. We were so still that I could make out quiet but frantic talking upstairs and more rushing footsteps. I read my upstairs neighbour's texts again to make sure my eyes hadn't deceived me. I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed one of my own kitchen knives, then returned to the same spot outside Dylan's room, anticipating a crazed psycho busting down the door at any second. I chanted manic prayers for safety on repeat in my head. Not a sound came from inside his room. After what seemed like years, I heard sirens in the distance and my heart rate started to slow a little. My grip on the knife handle loosened. Eventually, I heard some shouting, more footsteps and banging that gradually faded in volume. "This is the police!" shouted a voice. I looked through the peephole to confirm that it was a cop, then opened the door, knife still in hand. They were very reassuring and informed us that a tall, lanky man with black hair had just been apprehended and taken into police custody. He had knocked on my door and was waiting for someone inside to open it. He was indeed waiting with a freshly sharpened knife. What was he going to do with it, to the first person who opened that door, which was going to be me? Well, if it isn't obvious, then your guess is as good as mine. This guy's name was Gregory. He seemed to bounce around from place to place with no permanent address, even travelling between states, and doing petty crimes like theft, harassment, and occasionally stalking minors. When they did a more thorough search, it turns out he had been involved in at least one gruesome murder in a different state, and ended up being given a life sentence for it, along with his accomplices. I wouldn't have wished that terror upon anyone, but these unfortunate things happen. The side effects of the psychological damage I experienced that day have never left me. However, I know people who have been through similar horrors, but never lived to tell the tale, so I looked on the bright side and counted myself lucky. Where there are sick freaks, there will be victims. The sicko was in jail, and I thought that was the end of it. But there was a different side to the story that I only uncovered 10 years after the incident. Dylan was due to leave for college, living away from home for the first time. He had grown into a tall kid with a surprising number of friends, still obedient but relentlessly quiet. While packing his things and clearing out his room, I found a rugged-looking old notebook at the back of his bottom drawer. "Dylan's Diary," said the cover. I flicked through it with no intention to pry initially, and saw that he had written and drawn in it extensively, with impressively neat handwriting. He had always been a boy of few words, so I was intrigued. I began reading from the first page. Page 1, Cody's house, 11 a.m. He has to give me back my coat. There were a few stick figure drawings. Page 2, I need a book for English class next week. Ask if Amy has one. I turned the pages and the first few were filled with the same mundane elementary school day-to-day affairs, mixed in with a few doodles. Then I got to page 21. Page 21, why does my dad talk so much? He won't even let me get an Xbox, and he won't let me sleep over at Cody's house. Talking back is no use. I hate him. I felt a sting, and my heart sank. I remembered that day vividly, and a pang of guilt ran through me. I turned the page. Page 22. Saw Greg today. He says he can help me get rid of Dad. I said he was lying, but he says he's done it before. It was in the news. As my mind connected the dots, I flicked through the previous pages. This was the first mention of Greg I could find. I started to sweat, but continued reading. Page 23. Me and Greg are coming up with a plan. Need Dad gone. But I almost got caught talking to him today. Mrs. Watford, that stupid old mole rat, kept asking me. She took me to the principal's office again. I think Katie saw Greg and snitched. Need to be careful. A few blank pages, with a few in between filled with scribbles and admin-type notes to self. Then the narrative continued. Page 41. The word plan was underlined, with 2 drawings underneath. The first was of a stick figure kneeling by a door holding what looked like a dagger. This stick figure was smiling. There was another stick figure behind the door, with its hand on the door handle, about to open the door. The second was of the first stick figure stabbing the stick man who had just opened the door, his eyes now 2 crosses. Page 42. Greg came to my house and I showed him my plan. He said it was good and he could do it. We almost got caught by Dad, but I got back in bed just in time. He's going to get some tools from his house. Close 1. Page 43. Greg screwed up. He's in jail now. Why did Dad not open the door when Greg knocked? Everything went wrong. I don't know why. Page 44. I wish my dad would just shut up. I flicked through the rest of the notebook, which was blank. Page 44 was the last entry. I read the entries a few times and pondered what I should do. I never thought Dylan was capable of such heinous intentions. Confused and upset, I acted as if nothing had happened for a few days, but on the day he was due to leave for college, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I brought his duffel bag down and hooked it on his suitcase. He was ready to head to the station, standing outside the door with the suitcase and his backpack. Dylan, when you were younger, did I ever say or do anything that hurt you? You can be honest with me. No, why do you ask? He replied. I held up the diary. He froze for a second and I saw the colour drain from his face. I won't blame you for anything, don't worry. You know I love you very much, son. You were a minor and you were a victim of a very sick man. Besides, this thing is years old. I just want to know what I did wrong at the time to lead to this, and we can put it behind us. His shocked expression faded, leaving his ever-present blank stare. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Mom. I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant by that, but stopped. The corners of his mouth stretched into a wide smile. Our eyes met, and we stood in silence for a few seconds. Dylan, if I were to find another one of these notebooks, I began tactfully, would I see the blueprint of my wife's murder inside? Yeah. He didn't even pause to answer. Then he gripped the handle of his suitcase and walked off down the street. That was 2 years ago now. I never forgave him. Every night I still lie awake thinking whether he was born that way or it's somehow my fault. We haven't talked since he left that day, and he hasn't come back home. He's never tried to contact me, and I haven't likewise. It looks like he's doing well in college from his Facebook posts. He seems to have a lot of friends, so I assume he got his own place or stays with one of them. I wonder if any of them will ever find out who he really is. Wouldn't blame them if they never do. After all, I still don't know who my son is, and I raised him for 18 years. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But in our final story tonight, those pictures tell a tale too horrifying to believe. My wife is lurking in my childhood photos, but I met her at the age of 30, and she looks no younger in the old pictures. Sometimes it feels as if my life has been nothing but an ever-revolving door of grief. I'm only 34 years old, and I've lost everyone to death, rejection, or diverging paths. My parents, my sister, my childhood friends, and countless other loved ones. I feel numb, directionless. Above all else, I feel angry. I hate the world for taking them from me. I hate life for dealing cards from a rotten deck. My mother passed last year. She'd been fighting a lengthy battle with dementia since 2019. I didn't cry when she died. I had nothing left in the tank. I'd already endured small, painful pinches of grief over the years. I grieved whenever she lost a piece of herself. I grieved for every one of us that she forgot, whilst there were still those of us left to forget. Those 4 years fragmented me. Mum and I were so close, and it broke my heart to see her very soul disintegrate. She was my only remaining family. My dad and my sister died when I was young, and slowly everyone else vanished too. I can't explain it, but in spite of her deterioration, I think Mum held on to life for me. I worry, Brennan, my mother hazily said. You're safe, Mum, I said. You don't need to. No, I worry about Brennan, she interjected in a fluster. I'm Brennan, Mum, and I'm fine, I said, sighing. I worry, she absent-mindedly whispered. When my mother died in February 2023, I was left with one person in the entire world, Olivia. I counted my blessings to have a darling wife who would always be by my side, until I realized how terribly true that might be. Whilst I was clearing out my mother's attic, I found a box of photo albums, dust-coated antiques that I'd never seen before. Too many painful memories, perhaps. But a tinge of warmth spread through my body as I eagerly flicked through the pages, a fuzzy, forgotten feeling. I remembered being happy as a child. I was surrounded by family and friends. I lovingly tore through the pages, and I was moments away from shouting for my wife to come up to the attic, but then I noticed something bizarre. Olivia was standing in the back of a photo. It was a picture of a day at the zoo with my parents and my sister. Through metal bars, at the opposite side of the lion enclosure, I could see my wife standing there, someone I didn't know as a child. But it was her. There was no doubt about that. Distinctive black hair, fair complexion, and petite physique. She wore a thin, knowing smile that seemed unbefitting of her, or any version of Olivia that I'd seen before. My stomach gurgled nervously, but I smiled and laughed it off. Uncanny, I whispered to myself. Obviously, it couldn't have been her, I told myself. We're the same age, and she would have been a child at the time. It's just a doppelganger. I carried on flicking through the pages, and then a lump formed at the surface of my throat. My wife appeared again. This time it was a photo of our family's Christmas gathering in a restaurant, and outside the window, beneath a smoking shelter, a solitary figure stood and watched us. It was Olivia, or a woman who, yet again, looked identical to my 33-year-old wife. Once is nothing. Twice is a coincidence, I muttered uncertainly. I frantically tore through the photo album as sweat collected in thick, icy trails on my colourless cheeks. Olivia was in every photo, and she looked no different from the present day. The same woman, always lurking somewhere in the background, discreetly watching, ever wearing that foul grin. My heart thumped fitfully. This was no longer an oddity, a funny peculiarity. It was unsettling enough to see evidence of a person stalking my family, but a person who hadn't aged in 33 years? It was sinister. It defied everything my logical brain knew to be true. I found myself trembling in terror and clawing at my hair. I had stopped turning pages. After seeing my wife skulking in dozens of pictures, I hadn't the stomach to continue. But I couldn't tear my eyes off the page before me. It was a photo captioned, "Yummy cake! Brennan's 10th birthday party." I was sitting in the back garden on an overcast day. A decadent chocolate cake sat on my lap. My jubilant friends and family surrounded me. I was midway through blowing out 10 candles, and the flames leaned away from my pursed lips. There she was again, hiding in a photo from the year 2000. Olivia would have been 10 years old, just like me, and yet the camera told another tale. This time, my fully grown wife cowered behind the short fence at the rear of our property, but the top of her head peered into our garden, and I could distinguish her distinctive black hair. Her eyes were bloodshot and thirsty. She was, perhaps most hauntingly, eyeing the camera. It felt as if she could see me in the attic. "You're losing your mind, Brennan," I thought, eyes still unable to look away. "This isn't real. It's all in your—" A sudden wisp of wind extinguished the attic light. My body shivered uncontrollably, and I found myself wrestling with an undeniable thought. It sounded like lips blowing air. Trying to steady my breathing, I anxiously patted the floor of the blackened attic. I wish I wouldn't leave my phone in stupid places, I thought. I wanted to leave, but I didn't trust myself to maneuver through my mother's cluttered attic in the dark, and then my fingers brushed over a familiar, smooth surface. Gotcha, I thought, before picking up my phone and turning on the flashlight. I screamed. The birthday photo had changed. The candles on my cake were gone, and I was sitting all alone. No family, no friends. Nobody, not even Olivia. I stumbled to my feet and dropped the book. The floorboards moaned as I shifted my weight backwards. I had to get far from that cursed book, that cursed attic. I twisted to run for the attic door, but I didn't move beyond that first step. My torchlight illuminated something horrifying. Poking her head through the attic opening, Olivia smiled at me. Her eyes mirrored those in the numerous photographs I had just seen. Her pupils seemed darker, wider, red veins painted the corners, and her eyes rippled ever so slightly, as if they were not really eyes at all. I don't know what happened to the woman I married, but that wasn't who eyed me from the attic door. She was a horror. Some rabid mouse that had soundlessly slithered up the stairs and the ladder. My wife giggled. "I'll eat you from the inside out." And then the woman plummeted through the attic door, disappearing from sight. Thinking only of escaping, I lunged for the open door, but something seized my ankle, chaining me to the attic. I spun to face my shackle and my mouth parted in wordless terror. From the open page of the photo album, Olivia's twisted arm and face had emerged. She offered a toothy grin and unhinged eyes as she attempted to pull me into the picture. Vile bile, so rich, and with our consummation, it becomes complete. I cried in agony as I was dragged to hell by the thing that I had loved for 3 years, a hellish demon I had believed to be my wife. But it seemed I truly had nobody left, nothing but a cancerous tumour clinging to my very essence. It was draining the last of my pain, the last of my suffering. I closed my eyes and thought of my loved ones, the loved ones I was certain I would shortly see again. As the terrifying demonic limb pulled my leg into the photo album, I prepared to meet whatever fate awaited. All of that anger. The years spent in a perpetual psychological nightmare. For nothing. I visualized my mother's smiling face, and a calmness swept through my mind. "I worry about Brennan," she said. I started to fib, before deciding to unburden the weight on my chest. "No, I'm not fine, Mum. But I will be." Suddenly, the hissing ceased. All sound ceased. And when I opened my eyes, my wretched wife was gone. My ankle was no longer merging with the laminated plastic, but it throbbed painfully. The bottom of my trouser leg bore claw-shaped tears, and it was stained with fresh blood. To be certain the entity had vanished, I cast my phone light onto the book, and the picture of my 10th birthday had returned to normal. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by friends and family. Nothing could destroy that memory in my mind. But I shuddered as I turned the pages of the book. My smiling wife was still lurking in the photographs. I fled the house and I haven't looked back. It's been a year and I don't fear the memories anymore. I'm moving forwards. I'm learning to love again. I'm learning to open myself to new people and new memories. But I still fear loss. After all, that horrifying woman waits for me. I know she does. I fear the day that I notice her in a new photo. Tonight we've heard 3 tales of trust betrayed and reality distorted. From mysterious figures in the woods, to the secrets hidden in a child's diary, to the horrors that can lurk in our most cherished memories, these stories remind us that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones we don't know at all. Tonight's stories came from Reddit users, @NotNecessarily, @LateButStillEarly1, The Eagle Strikes. Links are in the description. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to like and subscribe to Ghast for more terrifying tales. Leave a comment below telling us which story scared you the most. Until next time, remember, not everything is as it seems.